Hey everybody, we're starting our Tamco Thursday Tech, or Tamco Tech Thursdays, I think we were calling it. So waiting to see how many people connect here before we get started. We're going to be going over 5311 today. That's going to be the product of choice that we're going to start on this live. So far I haven't seen anybody connect, so I'll wait for some more people to connect. I'm perfectly on time. It's right at 10 o'clock on the dot. So we'll get started here as soon as some people join. It looks like people are joining now, which is very cool. So I'll wait for some more people to kind of come in. Have some questions ready if you'd like to on 5311, and we'll get started on that particular product. That's what we're covering today. We might touch upon 5310, 5312, possibly epoxy in the mix of talking about 5311, but 5311 is the basis of the conversation today. So if you have any kind of questions, tech questions, how to use it, different things, be thinking of those right now while we're getting started and people are joining. So I won't say so I see you got your gummy bears ready, but I'm gonna see if I can do this without saying The more I do this, the more comfortable I get. I have so anyways, get your questions together. I got my trusty label here, my gallon label that I'll show. So we'll go over the many uses of 5311, how to use it, best ways to use it, different ways to utilize it in your system, whether you're doing collision, restoration, custom, whatever it is that you're doing. We're going to find different ways that you can utilize 5311. It's basically made after 5310, but with added benefits. So those are some different things that we can go over for you guys to be able to find better ways to be able to utilize the product. And like I've said before during prior lives, we're going to do these quite often. So every Thursday, I want to do something on a live where we go over a specific product and we basically stick to that product and answer everything we can possibly answer on that one product. I feel like that's a better way of kind of dialing in what needs to be discussed on one product versus kind of getting, so much convoluted information on so many different products that you get lost in everything. So we're focusing every Thursday right now on one product. Last week it was 5310. Today it's going to be 5311. After 5311, I might go to epoxy or I might skip epoxy and go to clear. I'm going to kind of see how it goes. Maybe even you guys can give some suggestions today and let me know what you're kind of looking for, what you think would be a better option for next Thursday's live, and we'll go from there. We'll probably even do, obviously during SEMA time frame, which we are in serious SEMA crunch right now. If you guys have been sending us color matches, we've been trying to knock those out. But we are a little bit, past due on color matches too, and just different things just because we are building the display that we're using for our SEMA booth. We have different things that we're organizing, whether it's projects, whether it's making materials, candies, different things like that for people to be able to use. So we are literally in a legit SEMA crunch right now. So just bear with us if things are a little bit off, if we're taking a little bit longer. We're trying to do what we can to get going. Okay, so I have a good amount of people already here. So I think we should kind of get started on what we need to discuss with the 5311. Again, it's only one product. I'm seeing conversations that are coming in now, different comments, things like that. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them and I'll answer them. So I kind of, everybody probably saw the comment in the group today, and Alex just reminded me about, 53 series primer, the primer being the shit. So, 5311 should be the shit too, but, what do I know? John knows more about Tamco and how it functions than the rest of us, right? So anyways, we're going to get started here on 5311. 5311 is the black version of 5310. Very much the same solids content, same basic ability, same sanding properties, same build properties, same mix ratio, same ability to make into a sealer. The difference is that the black particular primer that we have is also a direct to rust option. Now, I'm not here to tell you to take your primer and literally just spray over rust, scaled rust, horrible rust, flaking rust, things like that. I'm not here to say that. That wouldn't be the best way to go about doing the job that you need to do. But if you have rust that it's not practical to remove, if you have surface rust, if you have flash rust, if you have, where you have pitting and you've had it sandblasted, but in the sandblasting you have pitting and you're not quite sure if everything's out of that area, the 5311 would be a very good option. It would almost be like what I like to call an insurance policy. So you've had where it's sandblasted, you've had basically what you can do it to it. You may have even have used like an OSFO kind of product, which is a converter, and it will neutralize and convert the rust that you have, but you're not quite sure if that's still enough. So the 5311 could come into play. It's something that you could use over these particular things, and it would encapsulate and kill and prevent the rust from going any further. Best way to word it. So when we, and I don't have the panel here to show you guys, but I've showed it in the group different times, when we wanted to see how well 5311 would work, a long time ago, we had a customer who we designed this product for. They did tow trucks, and they were wanting something where they could use it on these tow truck bodies because they flash rusted so poorly, like really, really bad, very, very quickly in the climate that I live in, which is honestly very similar to even like a Florida climate. It gets really hot here. It's really humid here. Not as long, of a time frame as Florida, but it's a bad climate for, bare steel. Literally after it's been sandblasted, it's surface rusting, which can be a bad issue when you're building really expensive tow truck bodies. So we created this product for this customer. It wasn't for the main public until years later, but it's been well over 15 years now that we've had this product on the market. So what we did was we took a panel that had really, really bad scaled rust on it. And we did 3 different things to it. We brushed it, we dipped it, and we sprayed it. And basically what we were testing is the additive that we put into this primer that makes it have the ability to convert rust. We wanted to know what is the best way that the product works? What is the best means that the product works? Meaning brushing it, spraying it, or dipping it. Well, obviously, when you brush something, you're getting more mils than when you spray it. Obviously, when you dip something, you're getting more mils than when you spray it. So every 3 different steps that we did would actually give you 3 different results. 3 different mil builds, 3 different amounts of primer going over the same kind of rust, and we wanted to know what would be the outcome. So what we did was, as you know, primer is porous. It soaks in moisture. It's not supposed to be left on top coated, meaning once you put primer on, it's not supposed to get rained on. It's not supposed to sit in the elements. It's supposed to be in your garage, in your shop, whatever it may be for a period of time before you can get to it and continue on. It's not an epoxy. It won't stop penetration of moisture from happening. It'll absorb it in over time. When it continues to absorb that moisture in over time, it will go to the bare metal. That's when you can start having issues where the metal will actually start to rust underneath the primer because it's soaking it in, just like a body filler does, just like a polyester does. It will soak it in and it will go to the bottom and it will start to rust at the surface of the metal. And that's when you can start having issues. So what we wanted to see was what would happen if we did this with this primer on this panel, but we didn't top coat it. Let's leave it untop coated. Let's see what happens when we just do the 3 things I mentioned and then just take that panel and throw it outside. Not paint it, not single stage it, not sand it, not do anything to it, not epoxy it. Throw it outside, see what happens. So every single day in Smithfield, where I currently live and where our manufacturer's plant used to be before we moved it to Wakefield, we took this panel and we sat outside our manufacturer's plant. Every single day it sat in the grass and in the mud, and it would get rained on days that it rained, and it would have sun shining on it on days that it was sunny, and it would just sit there. We didn't do anything to it. Periodically we would check it and we would see what would happen. So the findings were, and this is real world testing. This is not just like, we're just going to say this works. We tested this. Now, we were making this particular product based on information we were given from the manufacturers who make the product. And a lot of times, whenever you're a paint company, such as us, you rely heavily on what the manufacturers that manufacture the raw materials that you're using, information that they give you. So we use a lot of BSF resins, a lot of BSF products. We rely heavily on what they tell us from their testing because they do very elaborate testing on all the products that they sell. They give you tech sheets on those products and they tell you how they function, their strong suits, things like that. So we rely heavily on that testing. So we knew right off the bat what we were told this should do, but we didn't know in a real world environmental experiment how it would function. So this panel sat outside for a long time in the elements like I explained. And what would start to happen was, and this is what we were noticing, over a long period of time, and this was, like I said, probably 13, 14 years ago now that we did this, so we still have this panel till today, what we noticed was in the areas where the least amount of mill build was, the rust would start to come through. It took a long time for that to happen. So the lowest area of material from using this product was when we only sprayed 2 coats of primer. And we sprayed 2 not heavy coats like I would tell you guys to do. Then we brushed it, like I said. And brushing it can put on quite a bit or not a lot. It just depends on how you brush it. So we brushed it and then we dipped it. Well, in the areas where it was dipped, obviously that's the most amount of material. That's the most amount of mill build. That's the thickest amount of material that you're getting, encasing and encapsulating that rust. What we found was in that area, it did the absolute best. In the areas where it was brushed, it did really well too. In the areas where it was sprayed and there was not enough material, it started to eventually come through many years later. Now, take into consideration that you're not supposed to leave your primer untop coated. You are supposed to top coat your primer. When you top coat your primer, it cannot absorb in any moisture. It stops that from happening. We never did that. This testing was done solely with primer. No top coat, no epoxy, nothing. We didn't sandblast the metal. We didn't clean the metal. We didn't neutralize the metal. It wasn't anything done to it other than literally scaled, rusted panel, wiped over with a cleaner. That's it. No sanding, no getting rid of the scaled rust, none of that. And then we sprayed this product. We put it in the worst conditions possible to see what would happen, to see if we could make it fail. And so far, it's not failed. You start to see after all this time a very small, minute amount of rust come through in the areas where the mill build is the thinnest. This is the reason that I tell people our epoxies that we make, the 662, 661, and 663, they have the exact same ingredient in those particular epoxies. But the epoxies are low mill build. They do not give you a high mill build. They're not meant to. They're meant to just solely seal the metal off and let you go continue on between, if it's bodywork, if it's, sanding, if it's going straight to single stage, whatever it is. Those epoxies are not meant to give you build. Therefore, the epoxy is not meant to be the sole source of converting rust because there's not enough mill build to convert the rust. So when you want to convert rust, and again, I don't recommend doing what we did, which was going over horrible rust. I recommend going over clean, prepped, sandblasted. It's okay if it's pitted, but I recommend going over a neutralized, clean, sanded, non-scaled surface in order to have the best possible thing. We did not do that, and we have had extremely successful results with this. It's why we're confident in telling you that you can take 5311 with 3 thick coats, unreduced, through at least a 2.0 gun as the means, an effective means, to convert and kill and encapsulate your rust. Now, if you take it and you use it as a sealer, which would be mixing it 4:1:2, and you only do 2 coats, and you're trying to cover over top of bad rust, it's not going to work properly. You will eventually see that rust come through. Again, you do not have enough mill build there to ensure that it's going to annihilate it. That's the biggest thing that I try to stress to people. It takes mill build. If you're not putting enough product on there, it can come back through. Now, is it going to come back through right away? Most likely not. But you need to follow the instructions when we tell you to do this. It's why I don't like telling people to spray over rust, because I feel like it's a bad idea. Number one, when you're doing a project to spray over rust, I feel like you should do it the right way. But again, there's different situations where that's not ideal. You cannot do necessarily what you need to do. Maybe the client's not paying, it's not practical, whatever it may be. There's reasons in which one may have to spray over flash rust, basic surface rust, even scaled rust to a degree, things like that. Therefore, 5311 comes into play. The only other product that has the exact same ingredient in it that we manufacture other than the epoxy is the chassis black that we make. The chassis black is direct to metal. It will stick over surface rust if it needs to be. Pitted metal that has possible rust underneath it, it will be able to do the same thing. Again, I would still recommend 3 good coats of the actual chassis, and then you'd be able to move forward. Best way to word it. So the 5311 can be used 4:1 and be very thick through at least a 2.0 gun. And then if you want to go up to a larger gun, you could. I have a lot of guys that spray 5311 through a 2.5, which would be like the same gun you would grab for a polyester, which you should stop using. It would be the same gun that you would grab for that, and you would be able to spray this primer through a 2.5 tip perfectly. And it would spray out the way you want it to, pretty slick actually, even for being a primer that's that thick. Spray out really thick, really nice, really even. And one of the biggest benefits that you'll notice, whether it be the 5311, the 5310, or the 5312, they sand and block really, really nicely. So when you go to break open the layer, the first layer of primer, you will notice how well it sands and just kind of glides and opens really nicely. Same basic idea with sanding 5310 is sanding 5311. Now I've had different feedback. Now take into consideration, I've sanded all of these primers, and I don't completely agree, but I don't use them in the same aspect that a lot of you guys do. I have guys that tell me that 5311 sands differently than 5310 or 5312. 5310 and 5312 will very much act the same. One's gray, one's white. There is no extra additive in them. So they will act very much the same. 5311 though, because of the additive, the rust conversion additive, which is the only primer in that 53 series that has it, could possibly make 5311 sand a little bit harder. Now, when I sanded it, and I sanded both primers at the same time in a live video that you guys had watched previously, I did not notice that 5311 sanded any more difficult or was any more difficult to break open the surface, or that it gummed up the paper anymore, or that it acted any differently. Now, granted, I wasn't sanding an entire build. I wasn't sanding like a car or a truck or something really, really large scaled. It was a skate deck. It's simple. It was sitting in 85-degree weather when I did it. So, I've sanded it in different aspects, but again, I have not sanded it in a long time on something really, really large. So, could it act differently? Yes. Could the sanding abilities of 5311 be a little bit different than 5310 or the rest of them? Yes, but it's minute. It's not a huge difference. One of the biggest benefits of all of the primers that we make, whether it's the gray, whether it's black, whether it's white, is the ability and the fact that they actually sand really, really nice. Biggest benefit we can say. So even the guy today who, doesn't think Tamco is the greatest thing, still thinks the primer was, the shit. So that in itself actually does sell the product. So whether or not he likes the rest of them, the primer, I always call it the gateway primer. I don't care if it's gray, I don't care if it's black, I don't care if it's white. The primer in itself, the properties in itself, its ability in itself sell you. And when it sells you, it allows you to have an open mind about the rest of the products that we sell. That's why I call it what I do. It's why I like to push primer on people before I ever push clear. Because when you use something that works so efficiently, so well, does what we say, functions like we say, then you believe us and you're willing to go to other materials. So that's really one of the biggest reasons why I like to push the primers first. I feel like it gives you a good foundation. It gives you a good basis of understanding Tamco, and then going from there and utilizing other products after the fact. So let's go over how to use as a sealer. 5311 turns into a sealer the exact same way 5310 does. You mix it 4 to 1 to 2. 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener, 2 parts reducer. That in itself will basically give you, a quart would basically yield almost 2 quarts at that kind of reduction. It will give you a lot of material, but at the same time, it will give you something that will slick out very, very nicely. So when we've been using the 5310 series or the 11 series, we're actually able to spray it through like a 1314. You don't have to go through a large tip. It'll work through a 1314 perfectly before you don't need to go any larger than that. 1314, depending on your gun, if it's a SATA, Iwata, Harbor Freight, Pro Source, whatever it is, it'll work through that size. It'll basically work what you would typically use as your sealer gun, which in a sense is like what you would use as a base coat gun. The same PSI, the same viscosity is what can handle a base coat or a sealer. So when you're using it as a sealer, it sprays very nice, very slick, sprays really, really well. Basically what you do when you're using it as a sealer is you spray it, you flash it about 10 to 15 minutes between coats. You only need 2 coats in most cases. It gets the job done. And then within the hour, you need to come back over top of it with your top coat, whether that be a single stage, whether that be a base coat. If you're going to just use it as a standalone primer, which the majority of people, in my opinion, are going to use 5311 as a primer over using as a sealer in most cases. What you can do is you can start sanding on it depending on the temperatures you're spraying in, depending on your climate, depending on if it's sitting outside, wherever it is, you can start sanding on it in most cases as soon as about 40 minutes. 40 minutes is about the soonest I have ever sanded it. In 40 minutes, you can start sanding it as long as it's been drying above 75 degrees, and it will function really, really well. So if it's cooler, you have to take into consideration that we use top coat resins in our primers. Our clear coat resins is what we make our primers out of. They will not function below 65 degrees. If it's cold, they will not function properly. They won't be able to dry the way you want them to. They will not cure the way they need to, and they will gum up the sandpaper. You'll know when these primers are ready to go right away, because when you go to sand it and you go to break it open, if it powders the way you want it to instantly, it's ready to go. If it's too cold, it will not be able to powder the way that it needs to, and you'll struggle. So I always tell people, if you're struggling sanding it, it's because it's not dry. It's not cured. The temperature wasn't right. Something was a little bit off. Therefore, it kind of slowed the whole process down. If you just let it sit a little bit longer, kick it out in the sun, it will allow it to finish through the way it needs to, and you'll be good to go. One nice feature is you can do body work right over top of 5310, right over 5311. Now, I have a lot of guys say, do you have to sand it? Honestly, you do not. If you're spraying 5310, 5311 primer, 5312, the entire series, and you're spraying it, and you want to start doing body work within the hour, I usually recommend you wait about an hour. You can actually start putting filler, glazes, whatever it is over top of it and not have to sand it. Some guys will not want to do that. Some guys do. I have guys that I know personally that have been doing this for well over 10 years and never had a failure with it. It has the adhesion properties to allow you to continue on without having to do that. If you want to take a Scotch-Brite, or if you want to sand it or break it open however you want to, feel free to. And then you can go straight to your glazes, to your body fillers and things like that, and start doing your body work. And then, go back over top of your body work, use the 5310 or 11 again, sandwich in that body work, and then continue on from there. So on average, depending on what gun you're using, how you're reducing it, how you're spraying it, things like that, you can be expecting to get upwards with 5311 over 3 mils per coat. It builds a lot. It gives you a lot of material. So if you guys have been used to using polyesters like we've talked about, polyester fillers, they yield you high builds. They sand really poorly. They have no shrinkage truly, but they sand poorly, and they have long-term adhesion, and they're very, very prone to cracking. And I've told that to people. They don't cross-link. They have issues. So always remember that 5310, 11, whatever it may be, is a replacement to that product. So if you want to use something that will not shrink, that has cross-linking abilities, 100% cross-links, it's catalyzed, your clear coat will bond to it, your base coats, everything will bond and create the proper molecules that it needs, whereas that won't happen with polyesters. It will give you what you're looking for. So if you're looking as a good replacement for that, 53 entire series, whether it's white, black, or gray, will give that to you. The nice thing about the black is it can be used, honestly, as almost like a black base coat. You can sand it down and you can go straight to other colors with it. I have a lot of guys who use the 5311 as a base coat, or they use it as a sealer, and then they're able to go to color over top of it instead of using a black base coat. Some people are confused. They think that you have to go between primer to base coat to, primer to sealer to base coat to clear, or whatever it may be. So a lot of guys would say, well, I can't take black primer and substitute that in place of black base coat and go straight to a color on a tri-stage. In a lot of cases, you might be wanting to use a pearl, or you might be using a color that takes a black base, like some of our colors in the custom line look better over black. Well, you don't have to sit there and spray black base coat first. You can use that foundation, whether it was a sealer or whether it was a primer that you sanded, you can use it as your foundation to put your color over top of. So a lot of guys, for instance, like Rocket Red over top of black. Well, you don't have to come back for Rocket Red and put 9900 over top of it that we sell. You can, but you don't have to. If you have the 5311 as a sealer, now when you're doing a custom color or you're doing something custom, I do recommend you sand the primers before you move forward. Meaning when they're used as a sealer, a lot of guys like to use a sealer wet on wet. I'm not a huge fan of that when you're doing custom work, because I think you want the slickest surface possible. And even our sealers could have a little bit of texture to them. So if you were to sand the sealer within the hour and then come back, clean it, and then go straight to your custom colors or whatever it is you're doing, whether you're using, like a pearl in an inner coat or whatever it is you're doing where you need a black foundation, I personally would sand it because that would give you a better foundation to move forward. It would give you a very, very slick surface. But also remember that you can utilize 5311 in place of black base coat in many, many cases. Whether I said it's used as a sealer or a primer that you sanded, it is a good foundation for colors to not have to use black base coat. So a lot of people, like I've said, think that they can't go straight from that to a color. You can. No issues doing that. There's no issues skipping that step. It would save you on material, save you on time, save you on labor. Again, if you want to put the black base coat, no issues at all doing that. I'm happy to sell you black base coat, but you don't have to do it. So far I'm 25 minutes into this. We're trying to keep them short. I don't want to go over 29 minutes. That's kind of the basis of where we want to stay when we're doing these videos, to be able to save them, to be able to share them on different platforms. I don't know if I see everything. Whenever I do this, I've been paying attention. I see everybody who's watching. What it shows me may be different than what it shows you guys after, because I have noticed that when I go back, it looks like some questions I never saw during the live, I could see now. I'm going through it. It just tells me a ton of people were watching, but I don't see questions. So I'm just kind of flipping through right now to see if there was any kind of questions, but I don't see any. So do you guys, before we wrap this up, because I'm going to get ready to wrap it up based on the time frame and things like that, and it's late for you guys on the East Coast, is there any questions on the 5311 or the 53 series in general primers that you guys have right now we are watching? Any specific questions that I didn't cover, things you've been wondering, different ways of using it that I didn't touch upon that you guys were kind of contemplating or wondering, anything like that? Before we wrap this up, I just want to kind of see if there was anything, that you guys were looking for. I'll give it a minute here before I, wrap it up, but I don't see any other questions, and I don't see anybody saying anything now. So I think we're pretty good. I think we'll get ready to wrap it up. So again, like I had said, every Thursday, Tamco Tech Thursday or Tamco Thursday Tech, however you want to call it, we're going to do a different product. I might skip the epoxy and go to clear. We'll see how that goes. But be getting questions together on different products. That way, if one of the products that I happen to choose is one of the ones that you've been having questions about, you already have your questions ready to go. Can 5310 be tinted with base coat? It can. So I have guys who take the 5310, the 5312, whatever it is, and they tint it with a base coat or they tint it with a single stage. You can do that. I try to tell people, don't go over 10%. Stay within 10%. That works the best. But you can take your base coats, you can take your single stages, you can put it in the primer, and it will tint it to the direction you want to. Just a little bit of a tip here. When you're using Tamco base coat, it basically covers so well that the color of your undercoat doesn't matter as much. Value shading your primers and tinting your primers tends to go along with base coat systems that have poor coverage. When you have poor coverage, then that's when that's an issue. So, okay, did you cover edge mapping? I missed that. Actually, let me touch upon that really fast. So the only way that I can really cover edge mapping and discuss why it happens is when you feather out an area and you go too thin on that area, meaning you feathered it out, but you went really thin. You're getting to where the primer is so thin that solvent can get underneath it. When the solvent gets underneath it, it attacks it, and you'll see the rings. Now, people have different names for them. I don't have to go into all the names. It's in the automotive industry. But people have different names for them. A-holes is what some people call them, different things like that, where literally you'll see a ring around your body area that you did. And what's happening is the solvent is attacking it and going underneath the layer. The more you spray, meaning the heavier you spray, the more product that you put, the more reducer that you add, the worse it would be. Now, if you flash it a little bit longer than going so heavy, it will help prevent that from happening because the solvent will have more time to flash off before it starts to eat underneath where it was feathered out, it's too thin, and cause that ring to happen. So I always tell people, try to feather it out where you don't feather so thinly. If you don't create such a thin barrier, then the solvent can't penetrate and it can't attack the ring where you went thin, and then you won't get the mapping. So I have noticed that with our primers, mapping could actually tend to happen a little bit more easily than it might with other primers if you sand them too thinly and you don't feather them out the right way, because we use very aggressive solvents in our products. We have to cut the quality of the resins. So when you're using a more aggressive solvent, and solvent is what's causing the edge mapping to begin with, then it's going to be more of an issue. So like again, flash it longer, do not spray it as heavy, and you might notice a huge difference. I've had a guy that I dealt with in Florida for a while who was having the issue. I told him, don't feather it out as much as you are. You're feathering it too much. You're creating too thin of a barrier. You're hammering on the primer. and you're putting in reducer in it, and it's going to cause it to happen more often, because the more you do, the more you hammer, the more you add of actual reducer, the more it's going to attack. So if you don't do those things, that should stop your edge mapping from happening. Most guys that I've kind of walked through those specific tips that I've told them, that issue has stopped. They haven't had it as much, and it's kind of gone away. So I think if you take some of that into consideration, even just making the flash time longer and not spraying as heavy on your very first coat, you should notice a huge difference. Remember, if you hammer on your first coat, that first coat is what's going to go under the soonest. The longer you flash that first coat, the better off you're having from not having that issue happen. So I think that basically covered. You have a store here in Indiana. We don't. We're located in Virginia. We ship from Virginia. We do have different people in different states that can ship to you at different times, but we are the ones who ship for the majority of the cases to different places that we don't have somebody located. Can I use a wet bed with 895 with the sear to flatten it out? You can. The Intercoat Clear is an awesome wet bed. It works in all cases to be able to do that. Let's see. I think that basically covers it. I'm at 31 minutes at the moment. That's about the max that I want to be. So again, remember, hey, Sean, I saw that you just joined. Remember, every Thursday, I don't know if it'll always be 10 o'clock, but it was my son's 3rd birthday today, so I had to push it out a little bit longer. Every Thursday, we'll be doing a tech. It's going to be anywhere between 8 and 10 p.m. I kind of like 10 p.m. because it's not too late, and guys on the West Coast have a better chance of watching it than dealing with dinner and traffic and things like that. So we may keep it at 10, we may not. Again, next week, I'll figure out what the next product may be. We may go straight to clear. We'll see what it's going to be. I'll let you guys know in advance. And I appreciate you guys watching. Keep your questions coming. You're able to ask in the group at any point. It doesn't just have to be during the tech videos. We're all here to help. Thanks to the Army for being supportive like you guys always are. We appreciate it, and have a good night. Thank you.